Life has a way of taking unexpected turns, doesn't it? You wake up every morning doing what you know, following the routines that have been established, checking the boxes that are supposed to define your success. You have your job, your family, your friends. Everything looks good on the outside. But somewhere deep inside, there's a feeling, a nagging sensation that tells you there's something more, something waiting for you just beyond the horizon, something bigger than anything you've ever imagined. You've probably been there, wondering, is this all there is? The truth is, it's not. What you don't see coming is about to change your life forever, and you need to be ready to embrace it when it arrives. It might not look the way you expect, and it might not feel comfortable at first, but that shift, that divine moment, is the key to stepping into the purpose you've always been meant to fulfill. For years, you've worked hard. You've shown up for your family, your community, your career. And yet, at some point, you start to wonder if you're truly living the life you were called to live. You've likely faced challenges, setbacks, disappointments, perhaps even crises of faith that have made you question your path. It's in those moments, when life feels uncertain, that God often whispers His truth the loudest. He is preparing you, even when you can't see it. What seems like a struggle, a delay, or an obstacle is, in fact, a tool that has been shaping you for the incredible journey ahead. Your struggles are not signs of failure. They are signs that you're being refined for something greater. Imagine for a moment that what's coming next in your life is the key to unlocking the deepest parts of you, the parts of you that have been hidden, waiting for this moment to rise. Maybe you felt stuck for a while, like you're just getting by, not truly living. Maybe you've carried the weight of responsibilities and expectations, and you've wondered if your time for something greater has passed. But here's the truth. God's timing is never off. What you don't see coming will change everything. The power, the purpose, the peace you've been longing for is waiting for you. All you need to do is open your heart, trust in His plan, and step into the calling that has always been yours. Now, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect. What if this is your moment? What if today, right now, is the time for you to rise? The time to embrace the power that has been quietly waiting for you to recognize it. The time to step into the life you've always dreamed of. Your struggles have been preparing you for this. You were born for something bigger, and now is the time to step into it. If this message resonates with you, if you feel the stirrings of something greater within your soul, I invite you to take action today. Like this message, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let's begin this journey together. It's time to embrace what's coming. It's time to be ready. Your life is about to change forever. In the small town of Greenwood, Illinois, life had always been predictable for Jack Thompson. At 58, he had a steady job at a local auto shop, a loving wife named Mary, and 2 kids who are now grown and living their own lives. Jack had spent the better part of 30 years in the same job, working on cars, talking shop with his buddies, and coming home each night to his wife's home-cooked meals and their cozy house at the edge of town. On the surface, everything was as it should be. He had built a comfortable life, one that many people might envy. But Jack wasn't happy. Not truly. Deep down, there was a growing sense of dissatisfaction that had been creeping up on him for years. It wasn't something he could easily explain. It wasn't that he hated his life or felt resentful toward anyone. It was just that something was missing. The joy he once felt working on cars, helping people fix their vehicles, had faded. The conversations with his co-workers, once full of energy and camaraderie, had become routine. Even his marriage, though filled with love, had become more about getting by than truly connecting. He had started to feel like he was simply going through the motions, not living with purpose. Jack had grown up in a family that valued hard work and stability above all else. He had been taught that if you did the right thing, followed the rules, and took care of your responsibilities, everything would fall into place. And for the most part, it had. But somewhere along the way, he realized that this life, this comfortable, predictable life, wasn't enough. There was more to him than the man he had become. It wasn't that Jack hadn't tried to find meaning in his daily life. He went to church every Sunday, he prayed before meals, and he tried to be a good husband and father. He had been a man of faith, believing that God had a plan for him, that his life had purpose. But the longer he went on without a clear direction, the more disconnected he felt from his faith. He was no longer sure what his purpose was, or if he was even following the right path. One particular evening, as Jack sat in his favorite armchair watching the news after dinner, he felt a sense of frustration rise within him. His wife, Mary, was in the kitchen cleaning up, humming a soft tune as she did. He loved her dearly, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The life they shared was comfortable, yes, but it didn't fill him with the same fire it once had. He realized, with a quiet sadness, that he had become complacent. He was no longer pursuing anything with passion, he was just living, surviving. He thought about the years that had passed, decades really, and wondered if he had missed something. Had he chosen the right path? Or had he followed it out of obligation, not desire? And then came the deeper question. Was it too late for him to change? Was there still time for him to become the man he was meant to be? That night, Jack lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling as his mind raced with questions. The familiar hum of the ceiling fan did little to calm his restless thoughts. He had spent his whole life living for others, fulfilling the roles expected of him. But now, at the crossroads of his life, he couldn't help but wonder if God had something more for him, something greater, something he had been too afraid to pursue. As the darkness enveloped him, Jack felt a stirring inside him, an urge to move, to take action, to step into something new. He had always prided himself on being a steady, reliable man. But what if being steady wasn't enough anymore? What if he was meant for more than simply getting by? What if, like so many people before him, he was being called to rise, to live with purpose, to step out of the comfortable life he had built? In that moment, as his mind settled into a quiet stillness, Jack felt a stirring of hope. It was like a seed had been planted in his heart. The thought crossed his mind. What if this moment, right now, was the moment I've been waiting for? What if this is the time for me to step into what God has been preparing me for all along? Jack closed his eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace wash over him. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from everything being perfect or easy. It was a peace born of the knowledge that this was the beginning of something new. He didn't know exactly what that something was yet, but he knew, with a certainty he had never felt before, that it was time to embrace the unknown. God had a plan for him, and now he was ready to follow it. The days that followed that night were filled with quiet contemplation. Jack didn't rush into any decisions, but he felt a shift in the way he saw his life. He began to realize that the dissatisfaction he had been feeling was not a sign of failure. It was a call. It was an invitation to rise, to embrace the potential that had been hidden beneath the surface for so long. He had spent years following the well-trodden path of duty and obligation, but now he felt like God was asking him to step into something bigger. Jack began to pray more intentionally, asking for guidance on what steps to take. He felt an inner peace when he did, but also a sense of urgency. He knew that this was the moment to take action. The question was, what was the next step? What was God calling him to do? One day, as Jack was walking through the local park, something caught his eye. There, on the community bulletin board, was an announcement for a mission trip to Central America, an opportunity to work with local communities in need of support and development. Jack had never considered mission work before. He had always been a man who worked with his hands, building things, fixing things. But something about the announcement felt like a sign. It was like a door opening, an opportunity he had never noticed before, just waiting for him to walk through. He took the flyer home and showed it to Mary that evening. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "A mission trip?" she asked, her voice tinged with both concern and intrigue. "I didn't think that was something you'd be interested in." Jack sat down across from her at the kitchen table. "I didn't think so either, but something's been stirring in me lately, Mary. I feel like I'm being called to do more, to help people in a way I haven't before." Mary listened intently, her gaze softening as Jack spoke. "I know you've been feeling stuck, Jack. And if this is what you feel you're supposed to do, then I support you. But it's a big change. You've never done anything like this before." Jack smiled, feeling a sense of peace in her words. "I know, but that's the point, isn't it? It's time for me to step into something new. I've been stuck in the same routine for too long. It's time for me to do something that challenges me, that pushes me out of my comfort zone." That evening, as Jack prayed, he felt a deep sense of peace and excitement. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the path he was meant to walk. The doubts, though still present, began to fade into the background. He knew this was the moment to act, to step into the unknown with faith and trust that God was leading him. The weeks leading up to the mission trip were filled with anticipation. Jack spent time preparing for the trip, learning about the community he would be serving, and praying for strength and guidance. But it wasn't just the trip itself that was changing him. It was the journey he was on in his heart. He was letting go of the life he had built and embracing something far greater. The trip was the first step into a new chapter of his life, one that was filled with purpose and meaning. When the day of the mission trip finally arrived, Jack felt a sense of excitement and fear all at once. The fear was natural. He was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind everything he knew. But the excitement was even stronger. He was on the verge of something new, something he had been waiting for, whether he knew it or not. As Jack stepped off the plane in Central America, he was struck by the vast difference between this place and his hometown. The streets were filled with life, yet there was a palpable sense of need. The people here were living with less, but they also carried a sense of community and hope that Jack had never fully understood before. The work he did there was difficult. It was hands-on, physically demanding, and emotionally exhausting. But it was also rewarding in ways Jack couldn't have predicted. Each day, he worked alongside others to build homes, fix roads, and serve the people in ways that would have a lasting impact. But more than the work itself, it was the relationships he built, hearing people's stories, sharing in their hopes and dreams, and seeing the difference they could make together that left a lasting impression on him. As the days passed, Jack realized that the purpose he had been searching for had been waiting for him all along. The struggles he had faced, the dissatisfaction he had felt, had been leading him to this point. He was no longer just living for himself. He was living for something bigger. He was serving, helping, and giving of himself in a way that brought true fulfillment. When Jack returned home, he was a changed man. He had stepped into his purpose, embraced the shift, and found a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He was no longer living for the approval of others or trapped in the cycle of routine. He had embraced the calling God had placed on his life, and in doing so, he had found a deeper sense of peace and purpose. The world had been waiting for Jack to step into his power, and now it was your turn. Your struggles, your pain, your doubts, they are not in vain. They are preparing you for something greater. You have everything you need to step into your purpose. The time to rise is now. Embrace the shift. Be ready for what's coming. Your life is about to change forever. Every story of change begins with a moment of awakening. For Danny Carter, that moment came one ordinary morning in late spring. He had been feeling restless for months, yet he couldn't quite put his finger on what was missing. He was 52, living in a quiet suburb just outside Nashville, Tennessee. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. He had a stable job in IT, a loving wife named Jane, and 2 grown children who were off building their own lives. His family, his house, and the steady paycheck from his 30 years of work seemed like the textbook American dream. But behind the facade, Danny was no longer content. He had worked hard all his life, earning everything he had. But something didn't sit right in his heart. For years, he had kept his head down, doing what was expected of him. Work hard, provide for the family, and live a respectable life. But there was a quiet longing within him that he had suppressed for far too long. The days felt repetitive. The weekends seemed too short. He felt stuck in a routine he hadn't chosen, doing work that paid the bills, but didn't fulfill him. Finally, often wondered if there was more to life than this. Was this really all God had planned for him? It wasn't that Danny didn't believe. He had grown up in a Christian household, attended church regularly, and said his prayers at night. But somewhere along the way, life had pulled him away from the passion he once felt for his faith. He had become so caught up in the responsibilities and pressures of everyday life that he had lost sight of the calling God had placed on his heart. The doubts began to creep in, and he started to wonder whether he had missed the path God had laid out for him. One evening, as Danny was sitting on the porch, looking out at the stillness of the neighborhood, he felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had worked hard his whole life, but he had the sinking feeling that something had been left undone, some part of him that had not been nurtured. He looked at his wife Jane, who had always been his rock. She was supportive, but even she had noticed that Danny was growing distant, preoccupied with thoughts he couldn't articulate. It was during these moments of solitude that Danny found himself praying more deeply, asking God to show him what was next. The questions that had been swirling around in his mind began to take shape. What is my purpose? What is God calling me to do at this stage of my life? And then one morning, as he sat quietly before work, a verse from the Bible came to him, Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. The verse seemed to pierce his heart in a way it never had before. Plans to prosper you, he thought. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Those words, so familiar, now felt like a message directly for him. God had a plan for him, and it wasn't one of stagnation or comfort. He had been living a life that wasn't bad, but it wasn't the one God had designed for him either. And in that moment, Danny realized that it was time to step out of the safety of what he knew and into the unknown. The realization that something had to change was one thing, acting on it was another. Danny's heart was filled with the desire for more purpose, more connection, more meaning. But the path ahead was unclear, and that uncertainty brought fear. He had spent his entire life building security, playing by the rules and following a predictable path. What if stepping out of his comfort zone meant losing everything he had worked for? The fear was overwhelming. What would Jane think? They had worked so hard to get to where they were. Would she understand if he suddenly told her that he wanted to leave his job, pursue something new, something uncertain? How would he explain that he felt called to make a difference, to do something that wasn't just for himself, but for others? There were also practical considerations. Danny had spent 30 years climbing the corporate ladder in a field he had grown tired of. His income, his retirement plan, his health benefits, everything he had worked for depended on him staying in his job. Walking away from that security seemed like a reckless decision. What if he failed? What if he disappointed everyone who had relied on him? What if, in seeking a deeper purpose, he lost the very things that had given him comfort? For a week, Danny wrestled with the decision. Each day he woke up with the desire to change, to embrace the life he felt called to live. But each night the fear crept in, and he found himself paralyzed. The uncertainty of the unknown was a heavy weight on his shoulders. Then one night, as he lay awake in bed feeling the tension rise in his chest, something shifted. He heard a soft whisper in his spirit, a voice that seemed to come from within. It wasn't loud or forceful, but it was clear. Do not be afraid. I am with you. The path ahead will be challenging, but it will lead you to the purpose you have been longing for. Step forward in faith, and I will provide. The words were a lifeline. Danny sat up, heart racing, as he realized that the only thing holding him back was his fear. It was time to trust that God's plans were greater than his own. It was time to take the leap of faith he had been avoiding. He didn't have to have everything figured out, but he knew he had to trust that God would guide him every step of the way. The next morning, as he looked at Jane over breakfast, Danny knew it was time to share his heart with her. He wasn't sure how she would react, but he knew that he couldn't keep living in fear. He had to embrace the life God was calling him to, and that meant taking the first step, even if it was uncomfortable. Jane, Danny began, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. I've been thinking a lot about my life, about my work, about what I'm really supposed to be doing. And I believe God is calling me to something different, something bigger. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but I think it's time for me to step out of my comfort zone and embrace what He has planned for me. Jane looked at him, her face softening as she listened. She had known for some time that Danny was struggling, but she hadn't realized how deep it went. I can see how much this is weighing on you, Jack, she said, her voice gentle but filled with concern. But I want you to be happy. If this is what you feel called to do, then I support you. We'll figure it out together. Her words were a balm to Danny's soul. She understood. She didn't ask him for all the answers. She simply trusted him, and that trust gave him the courage to take the next step. With Jane's blessing, Danny made the decision to leave his job. The next few months were filled with uncertainty, but they were also filled with hope. Danny began to explore opportunities that aligned with his passions and his faith. He realized that his true calling was not in the corporate world, but in serving others, helping them find purpose and meaning in their own lives. He started volunteering at a local food pantry, offering his time to mentor at-risk youth and leading Bible studies for men who were searching for direction. Every day brought new challenges, new opportunities to serve, and new ways to use the gifts God had given him. The first few months weren't easy. There were days when Danny questioned whether he had made the right choice. The security he had left behind seemed like a distant memory, and he wasn't sure how things would work out. But each time doubt crept in, Danny leaned into his faith, trusting that God was guiding him. And slowly, things began to fall into place. He found fulfillment in helping others, and his sense of purpose grew with each new relationship he built, each new person he impacted. One evening, as Danny sat in a small church gathering, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by his work, he realized something profound. The struggles he had faced in his career, his marriage, and his faith had been the very things that had prepared him to step into this new life. His doubts, fears, and uncertainties had been part of the refining process. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He had stepped into his power, and in doing so, He had found a deeper connection to God, to his family, and to his community. Danny's story is not just his own. It's the story of everyone who has ever felt the weight of uncertainty, the fear of change, and the longing for a life of greater purpose. It's the story of stepping out in faith, trusting that God has a plan, and embracing the unknown with the confidence that He will guide you every step of the way. Your struggles have not been in vain. They have been preparing you for something bigger. The life you've been waiting for is within your reach. Now is the time to embrace the shift. Step into the life God has called you to live. Be ready, chosen one. Your moment has come. For Robert Hale, it all started on a rainy Tuesday morning when the world seemed just a little too heavy. He was 54, nearing the age where his life's work should have felt fulfilling, but instead, it felt like he was running on empty. A decade of work at a mid-level management job in a corporate office had brought him to a place of comfortable stagnation. He had a nice home in a suburban neighborhood in Ohio, a wife, 2 grown children, and a steady paycheck. Everything on the outside looked perfect. But for Robert, it was far from it. The routine had worn him down. The predictability of his days felt like a slow, insidious death to the excitement and passion that used to live inside of him. His career, once a source of pride and joy, had become just another thing to get through. His home life, though filled with love, had started to feel distant. His children, now adults, were busy with their own lives, and he and his wife, Emily, were growing apart in ways that were both subtle and unmistakable. The conversations they had at dinner had become more about logistics, what was for dinner, whose turn it was to clean, the grocery list, than about what really mattered. There was a time, years ago, when they would talk for hours about their dreams, their faith, and their plans for the future. But that was long gone. In the quiet moments, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant for something more. He had spent so many years focused on survival, getting through the workday, paying the bills, taking care of the family, that he had neglected his own dreams. His passion for helping others, for making a difference in the world, had been buried beneath the weight of obligation and expectation. The quiet yearning to do something greater, to live a life of purpose, gnawed at him every day, but he pushed it aside, convinced that at his age it was too late to change. He had tried to ignore it, but it was always there, whispering to him. His faith, which had been strong in his younger years, had started to feel distant too. He still went to church, said his prayers, but it felt like he was just going through the motions. He would sit in the pews, listening to the pastor talk about purpose and calling, but all he could think about was how disconnected he felt from everything he had once believed in. The man sitting in those pews was not the same man who had once felt a calling to help others, to make a difference in the world. And that truth had slowly begun to eat at him. One morning, after his usual routine of waking up at 6 a.m., drinking his coffee and heading out to work, Robert found himself staring out the window at the grey, dreary sky. It felt like the weather reflected his mood. He had just received another project at work, another responsibility to manage, and he felt the weight of it all. He had always prided himself on being a responsible man, the one people could count on, but it was beginning to feel like that responsibility was drowning him. He had spent the last 30 years building a career based on stability and reliability, but now it felt like he was living someone else's dream. His own dreams were still there, buried deep inside him, but he had ignored them for so long that they seemed like a distant memory. It was that morning, sitting in the quiet of his home, that he began to pray not the usual quick prayer, but a desperate plea for answers. Lord, what am I doing with my life? Why do I feel this way? I know I've been blessed, but I feel like I'm wasting what you've given me. Is this really all I'm meant to do? Please, show me my purpose. The prayer was simple, but it was raw and real. It was the first time in years that Robert had spoken to God from the depths of his heart. without pretending to have it all together. He wasn't asking for more wealth or comfort. He was asking for clarity. Clarity about the purpose he had been missing. That afternoon, as he sat in his office, something unexpected happened. His phone buzzed with an email from an old friend, Steve, who had moved across the country years ago to start a non-profit organization. The subject line was simple: "Need your help. Let's talk." The email spoke of a new project Steve was working on, one that involved helping at-risk youth find mentorship, jobs, and a path toward a brighter future. It was the kind of project that Robert had always felt drawn to, but had never found the time for. And for the first time in months, he felt a spark of excitement. Without thinking twice, he responded to the email, agreeing to help Steve however he could. It wasn't just about the project. It was about reconnecting with the purpose he had ignored for so long. It felt like a sign, a divine invitation. He didn't know where it would lead, but he knew that he had to take the first step. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and planning. Robert found himself energized in a way he hadn't felt in years. He began to feel a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment that had been missing from his life for far too long. As he worked on the nonprofit project, he remembered the man he had once been. The man who wanted to make a difference. The man who believed in helping others. The man who had a fire in his soul. That fire had never really gone out. It had just been buried under layers of fear, doubt, and complacency. As he spent more time with Steve and the team, Robert began to see how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He felt closer to his faith, more alive, and more connected to the people around him. He realized that the comfort he had once valued so much was not what brought him true happiness. It was the work of serving others, of living with purpose, that gave him a deeper sense of peace. One night, as Robert sat alone in his car after a meeting with the team, he reflected on how far he had come. He had faced so much fear in making this change. Fear of losing security, fear of disappointing others, fear of stepping into the unknown. But now, he saw how all of those fears had been holding him back from the life God had truly intended for him. He remembered a verse from Isaiah 41:10 that had always spoken to him. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." With that verse in his heart, Robert knew that his journey was just beginning. He had taken the first step, and with God's guidance, he was ready to take the next. The shift that had started within him was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about stepping into the life he had always been meant to live, one of purpose, service, and faith. He had embraced the calling, and now he was ready to see where it would lead. As Robert continued his journey, he realized that what he didn't see coming, the shift, the change, the calling, was the very thing that would change his life forever. It was no longer about playing it safe, about holding on to the comfortable life he had built. It was about living with purpose, stepping into the life God had prepared for him. His struggles had not been in vain. They had been the preparation he needed to rise. The doubts, the fears, the struggles were all part of the process that led him to this moment. And the best part? This moment isn't just for Robert. It's for you, too. You have everything you need to step into your purpose, to embrace the change that is waiting for you. The struggles you're facing are not obstacles. They are stepping stones that are preparing you for the life God has called you to live. It's time to step into your power, to rise above your fears, and to embrace the life you've been waiting for. God has a plan for you, and now is the time to step into it. The world has been waiting for you. Be ready. In the heart of Denver, Colorado, amidst the hustle and bustle of daily life, Eric Barnes was sitting in his car, parked outside the small church where he had grown up. It was Sunday morning, and the air was crisp with the early autumn chill. He could see the familiar wooden doors, the same stained glass windows that had been there for decades, and hear the quiet hum of the church bells ringing. But this Sunday felt different. The weight that had been pressing on him for months, years, really, seemed heavier than ever. Eric was 57. He had spent his life in a steady, respectable job as an accountant at a local firm, managing numbers and balancing books for over 3 decades. He had a good life, a life that many would describe as successful. He had a stable job, a wife he loved dearly, 2 grown children, and a home in a nice neighborhood. On the outside, it was a picture of stability and success. But inside, Eric was feeling empty. He had always believed that if he followed the path set before him, work hard, provide for his family, live by the rules, everything would fall into place. But it hadn't. The joy he once found in his work had long since faded. The connection he felt to his faith had dimmed over the years. His relationship with his wife Sarah, while loving, had become routine, and the conversations they once had about their dreams and future had grown fewer and fewer. Eric had always been a man of faith, attending church every Sunday, volunteering for various committees, and being a reliable member of his community. But despite his outward devotion, he had started to feel disconnected. The comfort of his life had begun to feel suffocating, and the question that lingered in his mind more and more was, is this really all there is? This question had gnawed at him for years, but he had pushed it away, thinking that it was just a phase, a product of getting older. He told himself that he had a good life and that his duty was to stick with it. But that Sunday morning, something was different. As Eric sat in his car, staring at the church, a quiet whisper stirred in his soul. It's time to rise. You are called for more than this. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought. He had heard the voices before, the doubts, the questions, but never had they felt so insistent, so undeniable. More than this. He couldn't even imagine what that would look like. At 57, he was set in his ways. The idea of starting over, of making a drastic change, seemed almost reckless. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just a passing thought. It was a calling, something he could no longer ignore. With a heavy sigh, Eric opened the door to his car and walked slowly toward the church. As he entered, he could smell the familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals. The congregation was smaller than he remembered, but the same faces were there. Some older, some with children now. The pastor, a man who had known Eric since childhood, greeted him with a warm handshake, and they exchanged pleasantries. But today, Eric couldn't focus on the pleasantries. He had come here seeking answers. The service began, and as the pastor spoke, Eric's mind wandered. The message was about stepping into the future with faith and courage, about trusting in God's plan for your life. But today, the words felt different. They weren't just words. They were a message meant for Eric, a message he couldn't ignore any longer. You have been chosen for a greater purpose, the pastor said, his voice ringing with conviction. God does not call us to live in fear or complacency. He calls us to rise, to step into our true power, to live with courage and purpose. Eric's heart skipped a beat. It was as if the pastor's words were spoken directly to him. He felt something stirred deep inside, a spark of hope, of possibility that he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a sermon, it was a wake-up call. The life Eric had been living, the life of safety and comfort, wasn't the one God had called him to live. He was meant for more. After the service, Eric sat quietly in the back of the church, processing the words he had just heard. The usual comfort of the church, the familiar routine, suddenly felt alien. For the first time in years, He was unsure of what to do next. The weight of the decision ahead was heavy on his heart, but a deep, persistent voice inside told him to act. It wasn't enough to feel this stirring. He had to do something about it. That night, as Eric lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the doubts crept in. The fear of change, the fear of losing everything he had worked so hard for, suddenly seemed overwhelming. What would happen to his job, his family, his stability? He had built his life around security, and now it seemed that security was the very thing holding him back. He rolled over and reached for his Bible, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. His eyes fell on Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. The verse calmed him. He had always believed in God's plan, but it had never felt so real. For the first time in a long time, Eric understood that the struggles he had faced in his life, his doubts, his fears, his frustrations, were not meaningless. They were part of God's refining process. They were preparing him for the next phase of his journey. The next morning, Eric took a deep breath and decided to act. He called his boss and told him that he was ready for a change. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew he couldn't keep living a life of quiet desperation. It was time to take a step of faith. Leaving his job wasn't easy. Eric had spent years building a career, climbing the corporate ladder, and achieving the security that so many others envied. But the more he prayed, the more he realized that his true calling wasn't in a cubicle or behind a desk. It was in serving others, using his gifts to make a difference in the world. Eric's first step was to explore opportunities that aligned with his passions. He reached out to a nonprofit organization that focused on mentorship for young people in his community. He started volunteering on the weekends, helping at-risk teens discover their potential and build their futures. At first, it was difficult. Eric wasn't used to this kind of work, and he wasn't sure if he could make a difference. But as the weeks went by, he began to see the impact he was having. The stories of the young people he mentored touched his heart. He saw himself in their struggles, in their doubts, and in their dreams. Each day, Eric felt more fulfilled than he had in years. His relationship with God deepened as he saw how his plan was unfolding in his life. It wasn't always easy. There were days when doubt crept back in, when fear of failure lingered, but with each new challenge, Eric grew stronger in his faith. He was no longer afraid of the unknown. He had embraced the calling God had placed on his life, and he knew that no matter what came next, God would guide him through it. As Eric looked back on his journey, he realized that the struggles he had faced were the very things that had prepared him for this moment. He had been called for a purpose greater than himself, and the road to that purpose had been anything but easy. But now, as he stood at the beginning of this new chapter, he was filled with a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. He had embraced the shift. The world has been waiting for you to step into your power, just as it was waiting for Eric. The struggles you faced, the doubts you've had, and the fear of the unknown, they have all been preparing you for this moment. God has a plan for you, and now is the time to step into it. Don't let fear hold you back any longer. The life you've been waiting for is on the other side of your courage. Embrace the shift. Rise up, chosen one. The time has come. The world is waiting for you to step into your purpose. Now is the time to be ready. By the time Marcus Owens was 60, he had learned to live with the weight of his past. Born and raised in a small town in Alabama, he had spent his entire life working hard, first in construction, then in the local car dealership. His parents had taught him that hard work was the foundation of success, and he carried that lesson into his own life. Marcus had a wife, Linda, whom he loved deeply, and 2 children who are now grown and living on their own. The American dream, it seemed, had been realized in their small suburban home, paid off, with a modest but comfortable income that kept everything running smoothly. On the surface, Marcus had everything many people could ever want: a stable job, a loving family, a reliable car. But there was a problem. While he had always done what was expected, working diligently, raising his family, and staying true to his values, he had never truly lived. He had spent years being consumed by work, by the responsibilities that came with providing, and by the expectations of his community. He loved his family and was proud of everything he had built. But in the quiet moments, when the world slowed down, he realized that something was missing, something important, something vital. It was his sense of purpose, his passion for life. It was a deep yearning, a calling that had never gone away, no matter how much he tried to bury it. It had been 5 years since Marcus had left his job in the car dealership, a decision he had made out of necessity after the company downsized. Though he had received a severance package, the transition left him feeling lost. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to do more than just wait for retirement. He had been taught to work hard and build security, but what had that really gotten him? In the quiet of his home, Marcus often found himself staring out the window, wondering if there was more to life than simply going through the motions. His faith had always been a quiet presence in his life, but over the past few years, it had grown more distant. He still went to church on Sundays, but his prayers felt empty, like he was going through the motions. He had never truly asked God what he wanted from him. Not really. He had always assumed that doing the right thing was enough. But now, in his late 50s, he began to feel like there was something greater waiting for him, a purpose beyond just survival. The first real sign came one evening when Marcus sat down to read his Bible before bed, a habit he'd kept up despite his busy life. He had always found peace in reading scripture, but that night, the words hit him differently. He had turned to Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." As his eyes scanned the words, something clicked deep inside him. It was as if the verse had jumped off the page and straight into his heart. Plans to give you a hope and a future. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a surge of something unfamiliar. Hope. It was as if God was reminding him that his life wasn't just about the past or the present. It was about the future. There was more for him. He wasn't done. The weight of his past, the mistakes he had made, and the doubts that plagued him didn't define his future. His purpose had not yet been realized, and that purpose was waiting for him to take hold of it. For days after that moment, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the verse. It was as if God was speaking directly to him. He had always believed that God had a plan for him, but it was now that he truly understood the depth of that calling. He wasn't meant to live the same way, stuck in routine and obligation. There was more. But Marcus had no idea where to start. The breakthrough came one Sunday afternoon when Marcus decided to visit his old church, the one he hadn't attended in years. The building was the same, with its stained glass windows and wooden pews. As he walked inside, the familiar smell of old wood and incense filled his nostrils. It felt like coming home. But the real surprise came when the pastor, Pastor Dan, stood at the pulpit and began speaking about change, about stepping out in faith, about answering God's call. God calls each of us to something greater. Pastor Dan's voice rang through the church. It may not be clear at first, and it may be terrifying, but God has a plan for you. He's been preparing you for something bigger, something beyond what you can see right now. Don't let fear hold you back. It's time to rise and step into the life you were meant to live. The words hit Marcus like a ton of bricks. He had heard similar sermons before, but today they felt personal. This is the moment, he thought. This is my call. He could feel the stirring in his heart, the call to step into his purpose, to make a difference. But as much as he felt the pull, the doubt returned. Can I really do this? What if I fail? He had spent so much of his life worrying about doing the right thing, about being responsible and dependable, that the idea of risking it all for something unknown felt overwhelming. That night, after the sermon, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, a notebook in front of him. He began to jot down his thoughts, his feelings, and the sense of purpose he was starting to feel. He was tired of being stuck in his comfort zone. He wanted to serve, to help others, to make a difference, but he didn't know how. He thought about his skills, his ability to fix things, to manage people, to solve problems, and began to wonder how they could be used for a greater good. That's when the idea hit him. He remembered his time volunteering with a local charity, helping out at soup kitchens and assisting in building homes for the homeless. He had always enjoyed that work, but he never thought much of it at the time. Now, though, it seemed like something that could align with his purpose. Marcus began researching non-profit organizations in his area, looking for ways he could use his experience and skills to help. It was a leap, but it felt right. This wasn't about running from his responsibilities. This was about embracing a higher calling, one that required him to step into the unknown. The decision wasn't easy. He had to have a conversation with Linda, and he knew it would be difficult. She had always been supportive, but the idea of him leaving his steady job, even for something he believed in, would be a huge shift. "Linda," he said one evening after dinner, "I've been thinking about something. I feel like God is calling me to step into something different, something bigger than what I'm doing now." She looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean, bigger? You're already making a good living. We have a stable life here." "What are you thinking?" "I don't know exactly," Marcus said, his voice filled with both excitement and fear. "But I think I'm meant to help people more directly. I've been called to serve in a way I haven't before. I've always wanted to do something that makes a difference, something that uses my skills for good. I think I'm ready to step into that." Linda looked at him thoughtfully. "I can see how passionate you are about this, and I support you. But this is a big change, Marcus. We have to think about the practical side of things too." "I know," Marcus said, "but I know I have to do this. I can't ignore the call any longer." In the months that followed, Marcus made the difficult decision to leave his job. It wasn't an easy transition, and there were moments of doubt. But as he began to volunteer more with local nonprofits, his sense of purpose grew stronger. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. He was doing work that mattered. He was helping families get back on their feet, mentoring troubled teens, and working on community development projects. Each day brought new challenges, but each day also brought new fulfillment. Marcus's faith deepened as well. As he spent more time serving, he began to see God's presence in everything he did. The pieces of his life that had once seemed disconnected, his skills, his desire to serve, his love for his family, now came together in a way that felt divinely orchestrated. He had stepped into the life he was meant to live. And in doing so, he found the peace and purpose he had been longing for. His marriage with Linda, too, grew stronger. They shared their dreams more openly, and as they faced this new journey together, their bond deepened. Linda saw the joy in Marcus's eyes again, the man she had married years ago, and supported him every step of the way. And so Marcus's journey continued. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that stepping into his calling had been the right decision. His struggles, his doubts, his fears, and the sacrifices he had made had been part of God's plan to shape him into the man he was meant to be. The shift wasn't just about a career change. It was about a life change, a change of heart, a change of purpose, and a change of faith. And as Marcus embraced the call, he saw that God had truly been preparing him for this moment. The world has been waiting for you to step into your power, just as it had been waiting for Marcus. The struggles you face, the doubts you carry, and the fears that linger in the back of your mind are not there to stop you. They are the very things that are preparing you for your purpose. God has called you to something greater, and now is the time to embrace the shift. Step into the life you were meant to live. The world is waiting for you. Be ready.
It was a quiet evening in late fall when Rachel Mitchell found herself standing by the window of her small apartment in Charleston, South Carolina, staring out at the orange-hued sky. The leaves were turning, as they did every year, signaling another change, another cycle. Yet this year, Rachel was feeling more than just the usual pull of the seasons. She was feeling a profound shift within herself. At 52, she had lived a life that was, by all accounts, normal. Nothing too exciting or extraordinary, but safe and secure. She had a good job at a law office, a loving family who lived nearby, and friends who supported her. Everything was fine on the surface. But Rachel had spent the last year feeling unsettled. The routine of her daily life had become almost suffocating, a quiet ache that grew with every passing month. She had always done what was expected of her. She followed the rules, she worked hard, and she took care of those around her. Yet, despite all her accomplishments, she felt an undeniable emptiness. She had gone through the motions of life, checked all the boxes, and yet something was missing. She wasn't fulfilled, not in the way she once dreamed about when she was younger. She had spent her younger years filled with ambition, driven by the desire to make a mark on the world. But somewhere along the way, that ambition had been replaced by a quiet complacency, and with it came a growing sense of disconnection from the very things that had once given her purpose. Rachel's faith, too, had become something distant. She had grown up in a Christian home, attended church regularly, and believed in the power of prayer. But in recent years, it had been harder and harder to feel that connection. The world seemed to pull her in 100 different directions, and her life, which once felt deeply rooted in God's calling, now felt like a series of empty routines. The question that had been haunting her for months echoed in her mind. Is this it? Is this all there is to my life? That evening, after a long day at work, she knelt down beside her bed, her heart heavy with questions. Lord, she prayed quietly, I feel lost. I've spent so much of my life doing what I thought was right, what was expected. But I've lost my way. Show me what you want me to do. Show me what's next. She had prayed those words before, but tonight there was a sense of urgency in her heart. Rachel felt that God was about to reveal something to her, something she wasn't expecting. It wasn't a voice or a vision, but an overwhelming sense of peace, a knowing that something was about to change. The next morning, Rachel woke up with a new clarity. As she sat in her favorite chair, sipping her coffee, a thought began to form in her mind. She realized she had spent so much of her life following a script, graduating from college, getting a good job, marrying, buying a house, building her career. But she hadn't truly asked herself what she was meant to do with her life. It was as though she had followed the path that society had laid out for her. But somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of her deeper calling. The moment of clarity came as she remembered the years of service she had once been passionate about helping those in need, mentoring young people, and giving back to her community. Those moments, she realized, had always brought her the most joy, the most fulfillment. She had neglected those passions in favor of building a life that looked good on paper. but wasn't fulfilling her heart or spirit. That week, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about the pull she felt to step into something more. It wasn't an easy decision. At 52, she had built a comfortable life. The fear of leaving behind the security of her job, the certainty of her routine, was overwhelming. What if she failed? What if stepping out in faith led to more confusion, more uncertainty? The world around her, filled with its practicalities and responsibilities, told her to stay safe, to stick with what she knew. But the voice inside her, quiet and persistent, told her that now was the time to take a leap of faith. She had always been a woman who valued security. Leaving her job, her steady paycheck, and stepping into something unknown felt like a risk she couldn't afford. But something deep inside told her that this was the risk she had to take. Rachel had always believed that God had a purpose for everyone, but it wasn't until this moment that she truly understood what that meant for her. She couldn't keep waiting for life to present her with an opportunity. She had to create her own. Rachel didn't share her thoughts with anyone at first. She wasn't sure how to articulate what she was feeling. She had always been the responsible one, the one who kept things steady, and to suddenly be considering such a dramatic change felt reckless. But as she prayed, she began to feel more at peace. She didn't have to have all the answers right away. She didn't have to understand everything. What mattered was that she was listening, really listening to God's call on her life. One evening, after several days of prayer and reflection, Rachel sat down with her husband, John. He had always been her rock, her steady support, but she knew this conversation would be a difficult one. "John," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to talk to you about something. I've been feeling like God is calling me to do something different, something that's more aligned with my purpose, my faith. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I feel like it's time for a change." John looked at her, his brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean, Rachel? You've worked so hard at your job and we've built a good life together. What do you think you're being called to do?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I don't know exactly, but I've been thinking a lot about the time I spent volunteering in the past, helping with the homeless shelters, mentoring young women. I feel like I'm meant to do more of that. I've neglected that part of myself for years, but it's time to make it a bigger part of my life. I want to help people, make a real difference. I don't know how, but I feel like I'm supposed to do it." John didn't immediately respond. He sat in silence as though processing her words. Rachel felt a surge of anxiety as she waited for his reaction. After a long pause, John finally spoke. "Rachel, I see how this has been eating at you. You've been restless for a while. If this is what you feel called to do, I'll support you. But you know it won't be easy. We have responsibilities." "I know," Rachel replied, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I feel like I've been living for everyone else, doing what's expected, and I've lost touch with my own heart. I can't ignore this calling anymore. It's time for me to step out and trust God." John nodded, his voice soft. "Then I'm with you. We'll figure it out together." Rachel's decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. She began researching nonprofits, community outreach programs, and opportunities to serve. She realized she didn't need to have it all figured out right away. God would guide her, step by step, just as He always had. She reached out to old mentors and people she had worked with in the past. She began to realize that there was a whole world of people out there waiting for someone to help them. Her skills, her faith, and her passion could be the keys to unlocking doors for others. And so, she stepped forward. As the weeks went by, Rachel started to immerse herself in her new calling. She found a position working with a local organization that helped women in need get back on their feet. It wasn't glamorous work. There were challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But every day she woke up feeling alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. She was living with purpose, serving others in ways that spoke to her heart. She began leading women's Bible studies, mentoring young mothers, and organizing community events to support those in need. In the quiet moments, when she prayed, Rachel felt God's presence in a way she had never experienced before. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Every struggle, every tear, every moment of doubt had been preparing her for this life of service, of faith, of true purpose. Rachel's journey wasn't easy, but it was hers. The doubts, the fears, and the uncertainty were all part of the process of becoming who she was meant to be. She had listened to God's call, stepped out in faith, and embraced the life He had planned for her. And in doing so, she found the peace and purpose that had been missing for so long. This story isn't just Rachel's. It's yours too. The world has been waiting for you to step into your power. Your struggles, your doubts, and your fears are not signs of failure. They are signs that you are being prepared for something greater. The time to embrace the shift is now. You were made for more. Step into the life you've been waiting for. The world is ready for you. Be ready to rise.